This case is one of the most disturbing and gruesome crime in human history. Sant Nagar, Burari, North Delhi, July 1st, 2018. It's just past 7 in the morning, and the milk crates outside a grocery shop are still sitting untouched. That's strange. This shop always opens by 6. A neighbor walks up to the house next door. He knocks. No answer. He tries the door. Unlocked. What he finds inside will become one of the most talked about, most argued over cases in modern Indian criminal history. 11 people, 1 family, 3 generations, all dead. And no sign that anyone else had ever been in the room. To understand what happened in that house, you have to understand who lived in it. The family was known locally as the Bhatiyas, though their legal name was Shundawad. Originally from Rajasthan, they'd moved to Delhi roughly 2 decades earlier and settled into a modest 3-story home on Shanti Swaroop Tyagi Marg. On the ground floor, 2 businesses, a plywood shop run by the younger son, a grocery store run by the elder son. The family was, by every outward measure, doing well. Here's who was living in that house. Narayani Devi, 80, the matriarch, Pratibha, 57, her widowed daughter, Bhuvnesh, 50, her elder son, Lalit, 45, her younger son, Savita, 48, Bhuvnesh's wife, Tina, 42, Lalit's wife, Priyanka, 33, Pratibha's daughter, recently engaged, Neetu, 25, Bhuvnesh's elder daughter, Monu Manaka, 23, Bhuvnesh's younger daughter, Dhruv, 15, Bhuvnesh's son, Shivam, 15, Lalit's son. 2 siblings weren't in that house. Narayani Devi had 2 other children, a son, Dinesh, and a daughter, Sujata, who had married out or moved away and were living with their own families in other cities, Kota and Panipat. Neighbors described the family as close, religious, and financially comfortable. There'd been no reports of debt, no visible family feud, no whispers of scandal. In fact, just 2 weeks before, Priyanka had gotten engaged. She was due to be married by the end of the year. Before any of this makes sense, you need to go back further than 2018. You need to go back to a much quieter, much sadder story that had been unfolding inside this house for over a decade. Lalit was the youngest of Narayani Devi and her husband Bhopal Singh's children. By most accounts, he was the family favorite, funny, reserved, but somehow also the one everyone deferred to, even though he wasn't the eldest son. He married Tina in 2002. 3 years later, they had a son, Shivam. But Lalit also carried real, documented trauma. Around 2004, he went through a serious traumatic event. Some accounts describe a life-threatening incident tied to his business. First, he had an accident and had an injury in his head. And after some months, when he was in his shop, someone set fire on his shop. However, he survived but lost his voice entirely. Not figuratively. He stopped speaking for roughly a year. Doctors who examined him at the time reportedly raised the possibility that this was a psychological, trauma-based response, something clinicians would recognize today as a dissociative or stress-related reaction, and suggested he see a psychotherapist. That referral was never really followed through on. And this is a detail that keeps surfacing in expert analysis of the case. In many parts of Indian society at the time, seeking a psychiatrist still carried real stigma. Losing your voice from shock was something you endured, not something you treated. So Lalit's family did what they knew how to do. They waited, they prayed, and they hoped it would pass. Then, in 2007, his father Bhopal Singh died of natural causes. And almost immediately after, Lalit's voice came back. Here's where it gets strange. Lalit told his family that his voice returned because his late father had come to him, in a dream or in a waking vision, accounts vary, and instructed him to recite a specific prayer at a specific time. He did, and his voice returned. To a grieving family that had just lost its patriarch, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a sign. Lalit hadn't just recovered, he'd been chosen. He could still speak to his father. And from that point on, the family began treating him as something closer to a conduit than a son. When Lalit found his voice again, in a very real sense, He began speaking in his father's voice, carrying his father's authority, his father's decisions, dressed up as guidance from beyond. Neighbors said one of the granddaughters, Nitu, had mentioned to them years before the deaths that her uncle Lalit would sometimes be possessed by his late grandfather's spirit, and that the family would gather to receive his guidance when it happened. At least one family acquaintance told investigators he'd witnessed one of these episodes firsthand. None of it registered at the time as anything alarming. It looked like faith. It looked to the people around them like a family that had found a way to grieve. The very first diary entry is dated to right after Bhopal Singh's death in 2007. From there, for 11 years, the family kept writing. Instructions, reportedly dictated by Lalit and transcribed by Priyanka and Neetu, on how the household should live, worship, and protect its future. What started by most reconstructions as a coping mechanism for unresolved grief slowly hardened into an unquestioned belief system that governed the entire household. When the neighbor pushed open that unlocked door and walked upstairs, this is what greeted him. 10 bodies, hanging from an iron grill structure fixed to the ceiling of the central hall, a framework the family had reportedly built years earlier, officially for growing plants. Their hands were tied, their mouths taped or gagged. Most had cloth wrapped around their eyes. One body, Pratibha's, was hanging separately from a door frame in the same room. The 11th member, Narayani Devi, the 80-year-old grandmother, wasn't hanging at all. She was found on the floor of an adjoining bedroom, face down. Her autopsy would later suggest she'd also died by a form of partial strangulation, but not in the same manner as the others. Outside, on the roof, the family dog was found tied up, left there, barking, seemingly forgotten. Responding officers described it as a scene unlike anything they'd encountered. And almost immediately, the case exploded into national news because it broke every pattern investigators expected from a crime scene. There was no forced entry, no theft, no signs of a struggle, and critically, nothing was disturbed. Whatever had happened in that room, it appeared to have happened with the full participation of everyone in it. Police opened this as a murder investigation. That was the obvious starting point. 11 people don't typically hang themselves together in total silence, without anyone in the surrounding houses hearing a scream, a struggle, anything. Investigators pulled CCTV footage from a camera across the street. What they saw complicated the murder theory almost immediately. The footage showed family members, not intruders, moving in and out of the house the night before calmly. Around 10 p.m., 2 of the women were seen carrying stools into the home. 15 minutes later, the 2 teenage boys were seen bringing electrical cable up from the family's own plywood shop downstairs. Investigators would later confirm these were the same stools and the same wire used in the hanging. No stranger entered that house that night. Every single item used in the deaths had been sourced, carried, and arranged by the family members themselves, hours before they died. At that point, the case pivoted from who did this to them to something far stranger. What made them do this to themselves? The answer, or at least the beginning of one, was sitting inside the house the entire time. Police recovered 11 notebooks and hundreds of additional loose pages, hidden around a small worship area in the home. Handwriting analysis indicated the physical writing was done mainly by 2 of the young women, Priyanka and Neetu, but the content, investigators concluded, had been dictated to them over the course of roughly a decade, starting in 2007. That year is the hinge point of this entire case. In 2007, the family's patriarch, Bhopal Singh, husband to Narayani Devi, father to Bhuvnesh, Lalit, and Pratibha, died of natural causes. According to relatives, something shifted in Lalit after that. He became withdrawn. And then, according to family accounts later given to investigators, he began telling the family that he was being visited, even spoken through, by his late father's spirit, that the voice was offering guidance, instructions for how the family should live, worship, and protect their prosperity. From that point on, the diaries became a kind of running record. Instructions reportedly delivered through Lalit, transcribed by the younger women, treated by the family as if they came directly from Bhopal Singh himself. Experts who later studied the notebooks described an evolution in the writing. In the earlier years, the tone was described as conversational, almost like a running dialogue between family members. Over time, that tone shifted to something more directive and authoritative, as though the family had stopped questioning the source and simply started following it. The most recent entries were dated just days before the deaths, some written on June 27th and 28th, around the time of a ritual called Vat Purnima, tied to the worship of a banyan tree. The final pages described a ceremony investigators came to call the Bod Puja, or banyan tree ritual, something the family apparently believed needed to be carried out over roughly 7 days, culminating in an act that mirrored almost exactly the scene police walked into. Here's the detail that experts keep coming back to. The instructions reportedly told each person to tie their own hands and told the group that everyone would help untie each other afterward. In other words, as far as the surviving evidence suggests, the family does not appear to have believed this act would kill them. They believed it was spiritual, survivable, possibly even transformative, a path to some form of protection or salvation for the family, delivered by a father and husband they believed was still watching over them from beyond. CCTV from that final night backs this up in a chilling way. The family wasn't behaving like people preparing to die. They were behaving like people preparing for tomorrow. They bought stools, they brought up wire, they charged their phones, they left food out, ready for the next morning. They were, as far as any outside observer could tell, expecting to wake up. So if they didn't believe they were going to die, what happened? The post-mortem reports found no evidence of a struggle. No defensive wounds, no signs that anyone had fought against what was happening to them, with one notable exception. Forensic examiners found indications that Bhuvnesh, the elder son, may have made a last attempt to free himself. His hands were looser than the others. One arm was raised near his throat and the covering over his mouth appeared partially removed. Investigators read this as a possible sign that, in the final moments, at least one member of the family realized something had gone wrong. Too late to stop it, and evidently too late, or too disoriented, to call out and wake the rest of the house. Investigators ultimately concluded that the collapse of a homemade structure, combined with the mechanics of the ritual itself, ligatures around the neck, applied simultaneously across 10 people acting on shared instruction, turned what the family believed was a survivable spiritual act into a mass fatal event within minutes. This is the part of the case that pulled in mental health researchers long after the police closed their file. The leading explanation offered by psychiatric consultants centers on a rare condition often called shared psychotic disorder, or folie à plusieurs, madness of many. It typically involves one individual who develops a delusional belief system and one or more closely connected people who, through prolonged intimacy, isolation, and trust, come to adopt that same belief as real. In this case, researchers point to Lalit as the likely originator, a man who, after losing his father and reportedly surviving a serious accident that temporarily cost him his voice, may have been especially vulnerable to a belief system built around loss, guidance, and control. Over 11 years in a household with limited outside challenge to those beliefs, that system reportedly became load-bearing for the entire family's sense of safety and prosperity. None of the family members had any documented psychiatric history. No prior hospitalizations, no formal diagnoses, nothing that would have flagged this family to anyone on the outside. That's part of what makes this case so unsettling to researchers. It didn't look like textbook mental illness from the outside. It looked like devotion. Delhi Police's crime branch ultimately closed the case as a mass suicide rooted in this shared delusional belief system, not a homicide and not the work of any outside party. But not everyone accepted that conclusion. Dinesh, one of Narayani Devi's surviving children who did not live in the house, publicly rejected the mass suicide finding and pushed back against the investigation, arguing there was no motive and that his family had shown no signs of distress. He was not alone. Other relatives echoed that disbelief in the days after the case went public, insisting that a financially stable, seemingly happy family with a wedding on the calendar simply didn't fit the profile of people about to end their lives. That tension, between what the physical and documentary evidence pointed to and what the family's public, ordinary life suggested, is exactly why this case still gets discussed years later. It doesn't resolve neatly. There was no note explaining why. There was no crisis anyone could point to. Just 11 years of private belief, written down page by page, that eventually walked the entire household into that room. There's one more detail worth sitting with. During the investigation, police learned that Priyanka, the 33-year-old who'd just gotten engaged, was believed within the family to have Manglik dosh, an astrological condition some believe complicates marriage prospects. It was reportedly cited as part of why it had taken her so long to find a match. It's a small detail, but it fits the larger pattern. This was a family whose day-to-day decisions, big and small, were filtered through belief, ritual, and unseen influence, right up until the end. As for Dinesh and Sujata, the two siblings who didn't live in the house, they didn't just doubt the investigation, they spent time actively pushing against it. In interviews after the case became public, Dinesh argued there was no plausible motive, insisted his family had shown no signs of distress in his conversations with them, and questioned why a household with two functioning businesses and a wedding on the calendar would choose to end everything. Other extended relatives said much the same. Their doubt has never fully gone away, even now. The Burari deaths remain officially a closed case. Just a family that, by every account, loved each other enough to follow one another into a ritual they believed would protect them. If you found this case as unsettling as we did, let us know in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dive investigations like this one.